In the demolition business, the harder they come, the harder they fall. You're about to witness the world's most spectacular implosions. Hold on to your seats as towering structures and world records come crashing down. Implosion. It's the fastest and most efficient way to demolish a building. But it takes more expertise than explosive to safely collapse ever more complex structures. Today, competing companies continue to set records for imploding the tallest, longest, or largest constructions.
Everybody loves a good implosion. They're very dramatic. And to be honest with you, everybody loves to see a building being brought down by explosive.
For one company, Controlled Demolition Inc., imploding buildings is a family business. Since 1960, CDI has sent around 7,000 structures and 4 Guinness World Records crashing. Project manager Stacy is CDI's 3rd generation and one of very few women in the world licensed to blast. She experienced her very first implosion when she was only 3 years old.
I've pretty much worked for this company since the day I was born. I've tried some other stuff. I sang in a band, I waited tables, I did all this other stuff and went, there's just nothing more interesting than my family business.
Stacy's father, Mark, is company president, and at the age of 20 became the youngest ever licensed blaster. He in turn learned everything from his father.
I would hide behind my dad's seat in the truck and pretend I wasn't there. Of course, he knew I was there. And we'd ride down the road and I'd pop up. I was just hanging out with my dad. That's how I got into it.
Doug Loiseau is Mark's younger brother and company vice president. Unlike his older brother, Doug decided to get into the business later in life.
I'm a child of the late 60s and early 70s who didn't know what I wanted to do. You know, I enjoy it, and just by virtue of working with family, the old adage, blood is thicker than water, is true. It's nice to know that you have the unconditional support of a partner.
The Loiseau empire was founded by Doug and Mark's father, Jack, a pioneer in the industry. Back in 1947, he was one of the first to demolish buildings with controlled explosions. There are less than 10 implosion contractors around the world, but competition is fierce. And controversy rages over record-breaking claims. Michael Taylor heads the National Association of Demolition Contractors.
There's certainly a competitive edge about who did the tallest, who did the largest. I think it's a matter of pride amongst the implosion contractors about the nature of the work they do.
You know, we do argue here and there about who actually holds what record, and the truth is it's subjective.
Records are created just to be taken away by someone else's work, sometimes by another crew.
It gets down to nitpicking. Well, what is the biggest one? And, you know, what was the most difficult one? And this and that. They were all challenges.
Over 50 years, the Loiseau family has blasted itself to the top, claiming prize contracts and demolition records all over the world.
Fire!
Trelew, Argentina, tallest structure. San Juan, Puerto Rico, the most buildings. Seattle, Washington, largest stadium. Detroit, Michigan, tallest building. And the tallest order for the company that prides itself on doing what no one has done before. The massive J.L. Hudson department store in Detroit, Michigan would set the world record for the tallest steel building ever brought down by explosives.
That was a big sucker. J.L. Hudson was absolutely huge.
I remember the first day I pulled up on site and just kept looking and kept looking and kept looking, and it just seemed to never end, and I thought, we're out of our minds.
When I first walked up on it, it was like, wow, that's just
This is almost crazy.
The Hudson towered at 139 meters and covered over 18 hectares. It was built in 12 phases from 1891 to 1946. It was a shopper's dream, but a demolition nightmare.
It was built in probably 5 or 6 sections, which posed a challenge because you had the individual structures that didn't work together to pull the whole thing over at once.
Its sheer size and steel construction required one of the most sophisticated blasting plans ever created.
The Hudson's building was in a very dense urban setting, you know, surrounded by storefronts on every side. It's not like you're putting the explosive inside a borehole as you would in a concrete structure. So they're not confined, they're exposed. This breaks glass.
Neighboring buildings and Detroit's key people mover monorail system were only meters away. They all had to be protected from debris and more than a ton of TNT.
It was the biggest building I've ever worked on. And the cases and cases and cases of trucks that came in, the inventory control was a job in itself.
On October the 24th, 1998, the Detroit skyline was about to change forever. Packed with 4,118 charges, the giant Hudson would fall in seconds, taking a world record with it. But something completely unexpected happened. The collapse sent a steel column plunging onto the tracks of the People Mover Railway.
The design engineers for the People Mover said that it was very, very minor damage. The insurance companies got involved and it snowballed.
Surrounding buildings suffered a few broken windows, but the damage to the monorail was the most severe. It cost $4 million and a mountain of paperwork.
Nobody's perfect. You are going to do damage, you're going to break windows. Anyone in this industry that tells you otherwise isn't telling the truth.
The JL Hudson did land on target, a giant leap in the demolition world. But the Omega radio tower in Trelew, Argentina would set the bar even higher.
3, 2, 1, fire.
The tower was built in the 1970s and soared 366 meters, 15 centimeters high. That's almost as tall as New York's Empire State Building. By the late 1990s, the radio tower was off air, for good.
Initially, we thought we were going to take the tower and lay it out full height. Different elevations in the tower made that impossible. So instead of laying out its full height, the tower came down in accordion fashion, kind of a zigzag, in a fraction of the room that otherwise would be required to bring it down.
All right, Kevin, I'm all hooked up.
Fire.
The Omega radio tower and the world record for the tallest structure ever imploded were both shattered in seconds. But sometimes CDI carries out the most unusual requests, like blowing down a massive wind turbine along with its 100-meter blade. The Kauku wind farm was built in the 1980s on the north shore of Oahu. 10 years later, the plug was pulled on the faulty project.
The problem was the windmill was not in the right location. The blade was aimed the wrong direction.
Tom Dowd worked on the project. At first, it seemed a breeze.
The main challenge there was the limited amount of explosives that we had. They're used commercially in every state. Hawaii, it's very limited. And they're not something you can just ship over at will.
With few explosives and a tight time frame, workers had to get creative.
We create a notch, almost like you would cut down a tree. When you remove that notch with the explosives, the natural weight of the structure is going to fall into that notch.
Fire.
The wind turbine blew down according to plan, and the blade was salvaged to turn another day. An even more unusual structure demolished by the Loiseau dynasty was the National Tower in Gettysburg National Park. On July 3rd, 2000, this 94-meter-tall beacon towering over a hallowed battlefield was about to become history.
Below the tower, there is a cemetery and a road in the foreground. And you can see how complex the structure was.
The National Tower offered sweeping views, but its 70s-era architecture sparked official protests and a new modern-day battle over design tastes.
It always seemed out of place to me. It never seemed to fit the Gettysburg National Facility there.
In the year 2000, park officials decided to restore the famous battlefield to its original Civil War appearance. But taking down the massive steel structure was another fight.
The design of the tower, it had a very unique pipework design, a lattice work that spiraled around the base of the tower that gave it its strength and wind load. It's a very unique type of construction. We really didn't know exactly what it was going to do.
The National Tower was laced with explosives and set for the final shot that officials hoped would lay protests to rest. The steel girders proved weaker than predicted, but the tower fell right on target. Toppling towers with awesome accuracy is one thing, bringing down bridges is another. They seem to hang in midair before they come crashing down.
The difficult thing about bridges is they're in difficult to reach places. You're well above the ground or above the water. It means you only have one chance. If something goes wrong, it's a long way down.
Like buildings, bridges come in different designs, and no demolition job is the same. The 100-year-old Court Street Bridge in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, would be one of the oldest bridges ever imploded. The old crossing was already crumbling, and demolition expert Mike Taylor remembers how difficult the job was.
The Court Street Bridge in Rhode Island was a challenge because they had to deal with the issue of navigation, Coast Guard regulations, and how they could make sure that transportation was only disrupted for a very short period of time.
The bridge, spanning the Blackstone River, once linked a steel mill to the town. An intricate truss design with steel lacework, neglect had undone its former glory. Even though the bridge weighed 1,678 tons, it only took a puny 23 kilograms of explosive to bring it down. Court Street crumbled into the river exactly as planned, one of the oldest bridges ever imploded. But Shadle Bridge in Charleston, West Virginia, would be one of the most dangerous because of its poor construction. It also lay right next to its brand new replacement. Project manager Tom Dowd described this demolition job as one of the most intense.
The new bridge was, I don't even think, 10 feet away. We could almost put man lifts on the deck of the new bridge and work right across. So you not only have to worry about your design and getting the structure to come down, but also watching out for the collateral damage to the new bridge.
Shadle Bridge was built in 1931 over the Kanawha River. Many travelers avoided it for fear it could give way. In fact, in 1967, the nearby Silver Bridge, built much like Shadle, collapsed, killing 46 people. Bridge demolitions usually require a good climb, so project managers need experts with a head for heights.
To get a new employee and say, I forgot to ask you, are you afraid of heights? And to have them get that wide-eyed look and go, why? And put a man on a barge and put him 80 feet in the air and say, all right, this is what we're going to do.
Finally, demolition day had arrived.
3, 2, 1, fire.
Shadle was a success. Engineers banked on its shoddy construction and cashed in with a quick demolition and no damage to the new bridge. But like any implosion, it involved risk. And those risks multiply when you're dealing with a massive 3,600-ton structure like the formidable George P. Coleman Memorial Bridge. This bridge in Yorktown, Virginia spanned the York River, and at one time was the largest double-swing span bridge in the US and the second largest in the world.
The Coleman Bridge was actually a really unique project tip to tail. It was an absolute engineering feat.
The kilometer-long steel bridge was built in 1952. Its approaches were taken out before the implosion, but the remaining 3,600 tons would prove difficult to dynamite. If the entire structure came down all at once, it would create massive waves and an impossible mission for salvage crews to clear the riverbed. They came up with a plan to cut the old bridge into smaller pieces. Using enough explosives to demolish an 8-story building, they hoped the steel span would then drop right into the river. Each section fell into the river right on cue. The sections were just manageable enough to be removed and recycled. But hundreds of kilometers away in Florida, a more complex bridge, twice as heavy and much longer than the Coleman, had to be demolished. The 8,000-ton Sunshine Skyway Bridge over Tampa Bay would go down in Florida history as the largest demolition of its kind on one of the longest-running bridges in the world.
It was complicated by its sheer size. The piers below water were massive. One of the piers had been damaged by barge impact previously. It had a tragic history with the deaths of a lot of people when the original span fell.
During a thunderstorm in 1980, a giant freighter crashed into the southbound lane, killing 35 people. State officials decided to replace it with a sturdier structure, and the Skyway was grounded in several phases over 3 years.
It was working 7 to 5 every day on Tampa Bay, on the water, hotter than Hades. Storms coming in like crazy. It was a little frightening.
Besides wild weather, the explosives team faced a more pressing challenge.
The new bridge was directly next door to it, and it was a marvelous scientific, state-of-the-art design bridge that the people in Florida did not want damaged when the old Skyway Bridge was brought down.
Each reinforced concrete pier would require anywhere from 1.5 to 36 tons of explosives, enough to destroy an entire city.
The towers themselves, you fold away from the channel and you let them fold down on the approach trusses, and that comes down to the water.
Special explosives severed steel like sliced bread, and the brand new bridge survived unscathed. These massive concrete and steel bridges make for dynamic demolitions. But the biggest spectacles are on land, and the staged destruction of huge hotels, housing projects, and casino complexes. Controlled Demolition Inc. experts hold 4 Guinness World Implosion records. But to stay competitive, they stay on the move. So crews jet across the globe to work on all sorts of projects, including hotels and housing structures. Large hotels and apartment blocks are a regular challenge for demolition companies. As real estate rises in value, big old buildings become liabilities.
Structures have a lifespan, and whether they're a lifespan from the design aspect or whether it's a lifespan from the value of the property that it's sitting on. We've taken down relatively new structures, but the property is so valuable they want to take down the old and go up higher.
That's why the profit-hungry hotel industry constantly calls on demolition companies. And while the locations may be exotic, the preparation work must remain exact. In 1998, CDI was summoned to sink the Pirates Cove Holiday Inn in the Bahamas. On the north shore of Paradise Island, Pirates Cove was just a 5-minute walk from a huge resort. The resort was expanding and needed that site to seize more of the tourist dollar. Pirates Cove soared 18 stories high, but the main challenge had nothing to do with height.
The structure itself was fairly simple, except for the fact it was on an island. The logistical problems of getting the materials to a remote location.
It was so expensive to bring in construction equipment, excavators and this and that, and the duties were so high, they didn't want to put the wear and tear on the equipment to tear a structure down, so they blasted them.
The explosives were loaded, and with tourists watching, crews were bang on. Pirates Cove went down as planned, and a new wave of construction could begin on the lucrative site. Not all demolitions take place in exotic locations. Crews sometimes travel to regions where destruction is sadly all too familiar. The Hilton in Beirut, Lebanon, remained unoccupied after the civil war interrupted the grand opening.
When we got there, we talked to people and found out there were gunfights inside this structure. We have walls with mortar holes in them, floors with mortar holes in them. Where we typically would pre-remove this section, I can't hear because this section's been removed from mortar fire in the war.
The 4-star Beirut Hilton was built in 1975, but soon became a battleground between Christian and Muslim militia. They fought room to room.
At one time, the hotel was used as headquarters for one of the parties. The entire building was just pockmarked with artillery holes, bullet holes, everything, and it really stood, you know, as a reminder of that era.
After 27 years, a group of Lebanese businessmen bought the building and decided to get rid of the stark Civil War relic. But the hotel's location would prove tricky. It was built in the shape of an L and sat next to other downtown buildings and the coastline.
It wasn't only a question of getting the building on the back half of the L to roll into the open lot that we had, but to bring the two ends on the water side to roll into each other and not go into the street.
But the demolition company had another problem.
Explosives are very highly regulated. We finally got our explosives lined up, our deliveries, our shipments. Some of them were shipped in from Sweden. It takes weeks to coordinate some of that.
Once the 350 kilograms of explosives arrived, the workers faced a security issue they'd never experienced before.
It is disconcerting going to work and your, project site is guarded with, people with semi-automatics on their shoulders and all that.
After being in the center of a battle for nearly 2 decades, the Hilton Beirut collapsed in just 10 seconds. The shell-scarred structure was finally gone, melting into itself without hitting nearby buildings or landing in the street. The most difficult challenge demolition companies face is blowing up multiple structures at the same time. To have 4 or 5 buildings coming down at one time is almost impossible. But in 1998, a world record was shattered when 17 structures were imploded at once. It happened on the island of Puerto Rico.
The most challenging thing about the Villa Panamericana site was the site itself. It was huge. And trying to secure a site of that magnitude was difficult. We were working in all 17 buildings at any given time. It was a very phased operation, workers going ahead of me drilling holes, us coming behind them and loading these holes, and a whole other team coming behind and wiring it. Everything was done in phases.
Located in San Juan, each of the old public housing buildings varied in height from 5 to 8 stories. By 1998, government officials wanted to tear them down, but it wouldn't be that simple.
took weeks and weeks to load and wire all 17 structures. Probably one of the more interesting things was trying to connect them all together because the site was so expansive, but we still wanted to be able to push one button. So what this means is we have to connect all of these 17 buildings together and time them to fail at different times.
With 17 buildings crashing down at one time, the possibility of earth-shaking vibrations was a serious concern.
Because there were so many buildings that had to come down, we wanted to spread out the fall of the material to keep down vibration. Immediately adjacent to the site where we were working were homes and apartments that had been sold off. We did everything we could not to impact the operations in the adjacent communities, and vibration was one of the things we had to work hard to control.
The plan was to delay each detonation by a few seconds so the buildings would fall like dominoes. On August 16th, 1998, it was time to attempt the world record.
Fire. I actually stood on the top of a building that was supposed to remain and shot down across the site, and it was just absolutely amazing to watch 17 structures of that size moving at once. It was just a really incredible thing.
Blowing up several buildings at once is obviously complex. But that's not all. CDI has faced even greater challenges. The crew receives calls from Hollywood to not only bring down a building, but also to produce a spectacle engineered to entertain on a huge scale. Construction can take years, destruction only seconds. But there are some demolitions that are in a class of their own. Unusual, action-packed, or engineered to entertain, these are some of the most amazing engineering feats in the world.
Implosion could be both a science and an art, using one to create the other. We take the physics involved, the engineering, and can take a 20-story building or an 8-story building and turn it into this fluid, rolling demolition.
That's why movie makers use demolition jobs around the world.
Over the years, we've had the rare fortune of working on numerous movie sets, and that's always a lot of fun because you're just dealing with a whole different element, I guess. You know, there's actors, there's stuntmen. It's like working on a different planet.
The directors tend to not realize the gravity of the situation. They want all smoke and mirrors, and we want to do the meat and potatoes. We've got to get a structure down.
In 1998, the old Dr. Pepper bottling plant in Baltimore, Maryland was earmarked for demolition. Its impending implosion attracted the attention of Hollywood producers for the movie Enemy of the State.
They literally drew us several storyboards and said, "Can you make the building look like a bomb blew it up?" And we said, "Sure, we can do that."
The script calls for a scene where the stars, Will Smith and Gene Hackman, escape from an exploding building. No easy task, since they had only one chance to get it right.
As this factory is supposed to be self-destructing, we have a helicopter sweeping down and a car ramming through a fence, and this all has to happen in one fluid shot. Man, it was amazing we pulled it off, but the end result was absolutely perfect. The explosion looked fabulous.
Another demolition project job was just as entertaining, and this time the show would be live. Thousands of spectators gather in Las Vegas, Nevada to watch the famous Dunes Hotel and Casino explode in a shower of special effects. The Dunes opened in 1955, and soon became the most luxurious hotel in Las Vegas. It attracted celebrities like members of the famous Rat Pack. Property tycoon Steve Wynn bought the building in 1992 and wanted to turn its demolition into an unforgettable advertisement for his new casino.
Steve said, and I quote, "I want this to be untoppable.
He realizes that it is a spectator sport.
I want you to create a show that no one will match."
He realizes that it is graphically beautiful.
They want people to know about the new casinos, so when they bring down the old casinos, the Rat Pack casinos, they always implode them with as much fanfare as is humanly possible.
The event started with a 6-minute fireworks show, billed as the largest of its kind in Vegas history.
The fireworks display was... there was nothing to compare it to.
It was incredibly complex because not only were we imploding a 22-story building, we were also detonating thousands of pyrotechnic devices in the building to create a show.
That was really nerve-wracking. Really nerve-wracking.
The timing became even more complex when Wynn demanded that the implosion coincide with the grand opening of his new hotel casino a mile down the strip.
He wanted the sign to come down and tomahawk into the casino level of the hotel. And this is all, of course, being timed around Steve Wynn firing a cannon shot from Treasure Island, which is supposed to be, you know, the kickoff to the entire sequence.
Several carefully choreographed explosions would go off at the base of the dunes and then through the structure. It would culminate in an all-consuming fireball. This would require 1,600 liters of aviation fuel.
The main risk in working with aviation fuel, obviously, it's fuel. You know, no smoking.
For the actual implosion, an additional 165 kilograms of dynamite were loaded up.
There are a lot of different concerns when working with pyrotechnic materials. They're much more sensitive than the explosives that we use. Much more sensitive, and you have to be much more careful when working with them. Pyrotechnics scare the crap out of me. I wouldn't do it for a living.
More than 200,000 turned out on the Vegas Strip to witness the end of an era and explosive opening of the latest casino to hit the Vegas Strip.
Captain of the Britannia, prepare broadside. Ready, aim, fire!
We just very gently inclined the building back away from the strip, felled it back to where the old swimming pool was in the back.
The last original Vegas landmark came down in a blaze of glory. Since then, 6 more hotels have been dramatically demolished in spectacular visual displays. It's no wonder that many refer to Vegas as the implosion capital of America. Each building in Vegas was imploded at different times. But collapsing one astronomical building, like a stadium or arena, is an entirely different ballgame. Explosive gambles that can set new world records. Forget about football and baseball. The modern-day spectator sport is building implosions.
If people love implosions, they love implosions of big things. Casinos in Atlantic City or Las Vegas, they especially like sports stadiums, big, huge venues.
Implosion is most definitely a spectator sport. It's visually exciting, it's loud, it just kind of rocks your senses, and people love that.
Stadiums and arenas are knocked down every few decades to make way for more modern versions, with bigger skyboxes and more facilities for fans.
Many of the old venues that were built in the 60s and 70s have outlived their usefulness, and it's time for new things.
Bringing down an old stadium can be a complicated and sometimes sentimental business.
when it's time to bring the structure down. Everyone who ever went to see a game there decides to come out and see the last play at the old arena or stadium. Little girls that went to ball games with their dads, sons that went with their grandfathers, people that proposed to their spouse. All of these things, because sports is so important in the lives of Americans.
The implosion of an arena in Landover, Maryland, became personal for those demolishing a part of their upbringing.
When we were in high school, that's where we would go see bands play. We'd go see the Grateful Dead.
I'd never seen a sporting event there, but man, I saw some concerts there. So it was very personal to me.
It's bittersweet, you know, when you take down something that's, you know, almost dear to you.
Built in 1973, the U.S. Air Arena was also known as the Cap Center. Washington's top teams played there until 1997. In December 2002, demolition crews were called in to literally bring the house down. But raising the roof posed many problems. The arena was bordered on one side by the high-traffic Washington Beltway, on the other side, the glass-front Ticketmaster building, a mere 60 meters away.
The U.S. Air Arena was shaped like a Pringle, long and almost like a saddle. Structurally, you have to figure out how that roof works.
We changed our plans at midstream, went a different direction, and shot the concrete columns out from under the supports that held back the cables, letting the cables relax that way, directing the air away from Ticketmaster windows.
3, 2, 1, fire.
It only took 160 kilograms of explosives to reduce the arena to rubble. As for the Ticketmaster building, it escaped unscathed.
I believe we only asked the operators who were manning the phones and computers over there to step away from their terminals for a couple of minutes. Then we dropped the structure, let them go right back to work.
An even more challenging arena implosion took place in Indianapolis. The Market Square Arena would take nearly twice as many explosives to drop than the US Air Arena. Opened in 1974, the Market Square Arena was built with 100,000 tons of steel and concrete. For 25 years, it was host to hundreds of events.
It's where the Pacers played, huge following for that ball club, and so a lot of people didn't want to see it go down.
In fact, Elvis Presley performed his last concert here in 1977. The arena was located in downtown Indianapolis. A new mall would be built in its place. Surrounding historic buildings needed serious protection, but the most obvious challenge was how to take down the giant domed roof.
The roof in particular made it unique in that when an arena comes down, you have a lot of air that's being trapped. As it starts to collapse, it acts like a big parachute. Well, what we do then is we kind of perforate that parachute by creating holes in the roof to allow the air to escape out the top as it collapses.
We had to cut that roof almost like a pie. So the roof came in. We could then bring the seating sections and the rest of the structure on top of it.
Then we started blasting the support columns underneath the base. So as it failed, all this air could rush out of the top of the holes that we'd created just seconds before.
Market Square Arena took 3 years to build, but only 12 seconds to fall for a final performance. The dome shattered into pieces, making very little impact upon landing. Pacer fans were bittersweet about the Market Square demolition, but that was not the case for another arena implosion in Pennsylvania.
Three Rivers was actually one of the easier arenas we've done for one reason. Their own fans hated that place and they couldn't wait to see it gone. They were dying for the new park.
Thousands cheer as the implosion countdown begins for Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh. Three Rivers Stadium opened in 1970 as a multi-purpose arena. Some of the most famous American athletes played here. But by 2001, many fans compared it to sitting in a concrete ashtray. A decision was made to implode the aging structure. It was a job with serious engineering issues.
In the case of Three Rivers, the new facility was, I'd say, maybe 90% of the way complete. But part of that 90% was an all-glass wall that faced our structure And of course, we all got there, scratched our heads and said, couldn't they have waited to put this wall in until we were finished?
Just 25 meters away, the Steelers' new football stadium was definitely within the danger zone.
You can see how close the old stadium is to the brand new one and to the river. So you can imagine how careful the implosion contractor has to be when he brings the old stadium down.
Unlike domed arenas, Three Rivers had an open top. This time, the team had to come up with a completely different strategy.
So instead of having to create air vents and all of that, you had a bunch of open space for the air to go. So what we did in that particular one is took a wedge out of the ring. So by moving that one section out, we gave it room to kind of domino effect around the rest of the way.
On February the 11th, 2001, more than 20,000 people gathered to watch their giant concrete ashtray stubbed out for good.
The structure itself was at a triangle in the city of Pittsburgh. So you could watch the implosion from every side of the river. Huge crowd. They loved it.
8, 7, 6.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Fire.
Three Rivers Stadium was reduced to a pile of rubble in less than 20 seconds. And the fabric covering the glass wall protected it from flying debris. But even that paled in comparison to one of the most remarkable record-breaking implosions ever achieved. The Kingdome in Seattle, Washington, would break the world record for the largest structure by volume to be demolished by explosives.
On every level, that job was so incredibly challenging. Logistically, it was so huge.
This Super Bowl of implosions was one of the most complicated feats in demolition history.
Having a structure that big, that new in terms of construction, and having to make it do one thing, having one shot at it, and the eyes of the world on you, it's interesting. And that's the one project that stands out in my mind, personally.
Built in 1976, the Kingdome was so wide that Seattle's 185-meter-tall Space Needle could be laid down inside it and spun like a top without touching the walls.
We started looking at that job probably about 2 years before we actually started working out there. Seems like a long time, but when you're dealing with a structure that complex, it was necessary.
Within blasting range were historic buildings, a railroad, and a brand new stadium. All had to be protected from flying debris and earth-shattering vibrations. Foremost on everyone's mind, the Kingdome's staggering 23,000-ton concrete roof, one of the largest in the world.
If that was allowed to collapse all at one time, the vibration from the fall would be so great that the city of Seattle was concerned that it would damage underground utilities, fiber optic cables, have an impact on the foundations of neighboring structures.
Even seismologists were summoned to analyze the potential risks of falling concrete.
The ground has been filled in. The water table is very high, only a few feet below the ground, so it's basically a big bowl of jello that the Kingdome was constructed on.
Worse still, the Kingdome sat right next to Seattle's earthquake fault. Major league precautions had to be taken to minimize vibration from the collapse. 6-meter-tall berms made of dirt and sand were built to cushion the fall.
As the material is falling, it hits the top of this berm, which creates a cushion. And then as it collapses, it's absorbing that energy, which mitigates vibration tremendously.
Finally, in March 2000, tens of thousands turned out to watch what locals called Domesday.
Nothing could have prepared me for what happened, because I don't care how many times you picture it in your mind, you just can't get your mind around something of that magnitude coming down. It was just huge.
3, 2, 1. Fire.
In less than 20 seconds, the Kingdome was reduced to a pile of rubble only 7 meters high. It was like scoring the winner in the Demolition World Cup.
Beautiful job, Jack.
look at the aerial view of the debris, it looks like a pressed flower. It was a beautiful job. I don't think there's such a thing as a perfect job, because we were always perfectionists beyond the pale.
After all was done and dusted, the new stadium escaped without a scratch. Stadium implosions are as dramatic as any final. So are the world record demolitions. From the tallest to the most falling together at one time.
It's nice to be recognized for the work that you do. Is it paramount? No. Is it fun? Yes. To have the ability to say, hey, this in the Guinness Book of World Records, I did that.
The question remains, can these best of the best ever be bettered?
As far as record-breaking implosions, I don't know where that can stop. I don't think there's any limit. In general, I don't think there's anything that can't be imploded, no matter how tall the stack, how tall the building, what the building is next to. I believe that they can probably figure out a way to bring it down.
Bringing down buildings and breaking world records. The future of demolition is wide open. And in the end, the power and drama of each implosion will always be a sight to behold.